If you are a leader and you are deficient, seriously deficient in some management skills, can you compensate for that? How do you compensate? What do? Your team, okay? What else? You surround yourself with people who can do perhaps what you're not very good at. Did you have a comment? Oh, okay. Now let me turn it around. Let's shift the arrow in the opposite direction. Okay? If you are a manager and you are seriously deficient in leadership skills, can you compensate for that? Interesting, isn't it? The principle of compensation as it relates to leadership and management only goes in one direction. You can compensate for management deficiencies, but you cannot compensate for leadership deficiencies. Why is that? Pardon me? You have to learn it. Any other comments? Why can't you compensate? Why doesn't the compensation go both directions? I want you to ponder that. We could talk about that for a long time, but I want you to ponder that. So I want you to reflect on yourself, on your role, on your performance. If you are seriously deficient in core leadership areas, you cannot compensate for that with other people. You have to address it yourself. Let me begin with a little story. Well, here's my agenda. We're going to talk about the relationship between leadership and the creation of value, and then number 2, leadership and accountability. So let me begin with a personal story. Now, this is a Harry Potter story, and this is Hogwarts. Well, almost. It's the closest thing in the real world. This is Oxford University. So I went to BYU, finished my football career, and I do have the scar tissue to prove it. In fact, I'm going in next week for another knee surgery. It'll be my 7th. You know what, just as an aside, I remember when I was an 18-year-old freshman and I was in the weight room, and our strength and conditioning coach, he pulled me aside. You know, I'm 18. I don't know anything. And he said, Tim, do you know what the probability is that you will get hurt playing Division I college football? And I said, no. I'm sure you're going to tell me. And he said, yes. Do you know what it is, by the way? 100%. The only question is severity. It's 100%. And so he said, welcome. Welcome to Division I football. Anyway, so I finished that, and then I went to the University of Utah for a couple of years and did a master's degree. Had a wonderful, wonderful experience, although they were a little standoffish when I first arrived. They didn't quite know what to think. Why would you even want to come here? Actually, you know, Kyle Whittingham was a coach of mine for 1 year when he was a grad assistant. Outstanding coach. After that, I got married and we moved back to Washington, D.C. After a couple of years, we decided to go back to school, and so they lowered their standards at Oxford and they let me in. And when I first arrived, I'm going to share with you a true story without embellishment. I went to the Bodleian Library, which is a world-famous medieval institution. It's the university library. And they stopped me at the door, and they said, well, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm a new doctoral student. I'm here to start my research and get going. And they said, you can't come in. You haven't been admitted. And plus, you're not dressed appropriately. Where are your robes? Now, I knew a little something about that, and I had to purchase a robe. And so I got back on my Mary Poppins bicycle, which was my mode of transportation in those days. Upright, 3-speed, black, rod brakes, complete with the basket on the front. You got a visual now? It's a good one, isn't it? So I went back to, my wife and I lived in the servants' quarters of an old Victorian mansion at the time. I got my robe, went back to the Bodleian. They let me come in. They administered an oath to me in Latin, and I had to sign my name. I'm not exactly sure what I promised to do. I still am not exactly sure, but I signed my name, and they said, you can come in. So I went in, and I looked around, and I thought, I have no idea how to negotiate this institution. I don't know where to start. So I found the nearest reference librarian, and I said, could you help me? And she sort of didn't say much, just motioned me over to these gigantic card catalog cabinets. Do you remember those? Did you ever spend time looking through those? It's not a lot of fun, but after a while, so I went to work. After a while, I found, I don't know, 2 or 3 cards, reference cards for books that I was looking for. I took them to the reference librarian's desk, and I was immediately chastised. Why? Yeah, you don't take the cards out. What are you, an American? So go put those cards back, but what you can do is transcribe the reference numbers onto these little pieces of paper and then bring those back to me. So I did, and I said, great, let's get the books. And she said, well, your books will be retrieved and available for you in 3 days. And I said, no, I didn't say what I was thinking, but I thought, wow, okay. So I dutifully complied, and I came back 3 days later, and the books were there, and I said, great, where can I check these out? And she said, what did she say? You can't check them out. But what you can do is you can go to this reading room, and you can read to your heart's content. Just don't go upstairs or downstairs. Whereupon I said to myself, after all of this medieval experience, I said, you know what? I don't think I need these books. And as a matter of fact, I don't think I need this library. Here's a question for you. Why is this institution behaving this way? It's not very helpful. What do you think? It's not a rhetorical question. The way they've always done it. Do you know what their tagline is? We've been educating leaders for 800 years. Okay, what else? Why are they acting like this? They want me to drop out. It's their weeding out process. Any other thoughts?
It's librarian-centric, not students.
Okay, it's librarian-centric. Good comment. What else? Pardon me? Pride? Pride in the institution. Authority. They do have a monopoly on a lot of books. Okay? Okay, well, that might be true. The institution was not helpful to me at all. And as a matter of fact, I actually didn't go back and use the Bodleian much. Once in a while. Okay? Here's a principle by an Oxford professor, no doubt. Humans tend to seek a state of well-ordered, painless, contented, self-perpetuating equilibrium. This is Newtonian physics applied to an organization. Organizations, if left to themselves, seek a state of equilibrium. Do they not? They seek stability and stasis unless there's leadership around to make it different. So what organizations like to do is hang a do not disturb sign. That's the natural tendency of organizations. So I want you to reflect on this. Small and or young organizations, like puppies or kittens, inherit agility as a birthright. Now, the great thing that you have going for you, most of you, is that how many of you work for small businesses? Okay? And I don't know what the official definition for small business is here, but okay, mid-sized businesses. Not too many. So you have inherited agility as a birthright. There's a whole body of theory and research called structural inertia theory that says that certain characteristics of the organization get in the way of being agile and responsive. The first question is, how big are you? Size. And the second question is, how old are you? Age. So you have inherent agility in the organization, but as you move through the stages of development, you will increasingly confront challenges to agility. Is that not true? Okay. So the first part of your job is to preserve the status quo. This is the first part of your job as a leader. Only through preserving the status quo can we create value today, based on the strategy, the business model, and the operational configuration of a business. The second part of your job is to disturb. You're in business to disturb the peace, to create disturbances on purpose. The difficulty with leadership is that those two things are inherent in your role, and you have to do both. That's what makes it tough. And that's what delineates, in many ways, the dimensional differences between leadership and management. And the two disciplines come into sharper relief. So you'll see less change to more change on the horizontal axis. And then at the top, I'm distinguishing between management and leadership, and then the first distinction that I've already made between preserving and disturbing. So here are some other related distinctions. Value today versus value tomorrow. It's an important distinction between the two disciplines. Facts. Management is mostly about facts. It's mostly about facts as we know them. Leadership has a lot to do with possibilities. Very big difference. Management is scripted. In many ways, we lay out systems, structure, process, technologies, rules, procedures, and policies to guide us. Leadership is unscripted. Management is lower risk. The entire risk profile changes when we move over to leadership. With leadership, we become responsible for the entire control environment. Okay? Management is mostly about a state of equilibrium. Leadership, disequilibrium. Management, tactical. Leadership, what? Strategic. There we go. Okay? Is that helpful? Okay? It gives us a little bit more clarity. All right. Now, leadership and accountability. So I'm moving fast because we have limited time today. Another personal story. So I showed up at Brigham Young as an 18-year-old freshman, fresh out of Skyline High School. So I went down there, new experience. I went out to the practice field during the first week, and I saw one of these. What in the world is that? Who can tell me what this is? You do two things with this. What do you film. You film. The other thing is you can coach, right? You can get an aerial view if you need it. But primarily you film. So I went to the practice field and I saw one of these and I turned to an upperclassman and I said, "What's that?" And he said, "That's a video tower." And I said, "Really?" I said, what's a video tower doing out on the practice field? What do you think he said? We videotape all of the practices. Now, that was a new concept. What do we do in high school? We videotape the what? The games. So this was new to me. I said, really? He said, yeah, we videotape every practice. And so I said, okay. I kind of forgot about it. A couple weeks later, I'm in a team meeting, and my coach jumps all over me. And he says, Tim, you lost containment in practice 3 times. Now, let me explain what that means. I played defensive end. That means nobody can come around my corner. Can't let them around. That's your job. Wall it off. Don't let them come around the corner. When he said that, I immediately started to push back, and I said, no, I didn't. How do you think that went over? So the room wasn't quite this big, but all heads swiveled in my direction. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to say anything. Because I went into this, right? Deny, blame, and excuse. Boy, that doesn't work very well. So the human tendency is to deny, blame, excuse. Then my coach grabbed one of these. You with me? And he put a nice smile on his face. Are you with me? And he taught me a very important lesson with this very important statement: the eye in the sky never lies. And so then he pushed the button with a smile on his face, and he showed all of us in living color that Clark lost containment. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Okay? The reason I share that experience with you is that that was a defining experience in my life. That was a formative experience in my life. Athletics, similar to stage performance, music, art, these are areas where there's a transparent performance environment. We can see very clearly what we do well and not so well. Business is not a completely transparent performance environment, but it's getting to be more such. The reason I share that is because one of the differentiating factors that you need to look for in finding leaders is to find people who want to be accountable. It's one of the distinguishing factors that shows a difference between management and leadership. Now, to recap my first point, the other distinguishing factor is to find people who want to create value. They have a deep emotional need to create value and a deep emotional need to be accountable. Isn't it interesting that high performers don't mind being measured? It's those who are not that mind being measured. So let me show you a very simple model of accountability. There are 3 levels of accountability. The first is task level accountability. A task is a discrete unit of work. So I say to my son, Ben, go mow the lawn, come back, report to me. He knows how to do it, he comes back, terrific. Then we go to project level accountability. A project is a set of related tasks. So then I go to Ben and I say, Ben, I want you to mow, edge, trim, and weed. And he can go do it. Once he has demonstrated a track record for project level accountability, we go to the final graduation. The final graduation takes us to outcome level accountability. With outcome level accountability, I say to Ben, Ben, I want a manicured yard. Go make it happen. You see the differences? What we are not doing in organizations as well as we should is moving people from task to project to outcome level accountability as fast as they are able while appropriately managing risk. So we've got to do that. So the relationship between management and accountability is very, very clear. There's a willingness and an eagerness to be accountable. How are we doing on time? 12 minutes, okay? So I have a client back in Virginia right now, and the other day I had a conversation with this woman, and she's a VP of sales. And she goes around and she works with her sales reps, and when she works with them, she shadows them and works with them, and she writes down a list of tasks, sort of an audit, coaching experience. And then she gives them, when she's done, she gives them the task list and says, go take care of it. I said to her, how long have these sales reps been around? Oh, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Anybody see a problem with this? What's the problem? Pardon me? They're not learning. They're not learning. They are still operating at task level accountability. She is babysitting. She has no leverage. She has no leverage in her position. She has not become a student of leverage. She is not a force multiplier. She does not know how to scale. We have to do that as leaders. So I want you to think about, how scalable are you? Are you moving people from task to project to outcome level delegation as soon as they are able to do it? That's what makes you scalable. And that's what accelerates the development of people. If we are micromanaging people after they have the demonstrated ability to move beyond task level delegation, why are we doing it? That's not a rhetorical question. Why are we doing it? Why do we continue to micromanage people after they have the demonstrated ability to move beyond task level? We don't trust them. Why don't we trust them? If they have the demonstrated ability to move on. Okay. That's a good comment. I like that. Other comments? Yes?
Back to your first analogy of the library.
Okay. Control. Maybe you don't know how to give up control. So here's a question for you. Do an introspective. Okay? The reason that we hold on to control when it's not necessary, why do we? Fear. What else? Pardon me? We don't know how to lead. Any other comments? Comfort zone. Very good. We want it done our way. Okay? So just go do it. All right? Or it could be a mixture of insecurity and overabundant ego. Couldn't it? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's a good point, so we have to back up. When is it justifiable to over-delegate to someone? Okay, emergency. What else? What can we learn if we over-delegate? Pardon me? How much capacity they have. That's the answer. It's a diagnostic to know exactly where they are if we don't know and they don't know. And then we back them up and we calibrate. We get them right where we need them. Okay? So reflect on the way that you delegate and then hold people accountable. Okay? All right. Here's the last concept because we don't have a lot of time today. A simple distinction in leadership is one that we make. This goes back to junior high geology, between the core and the crust. The core relates to all of the indispensable elements of character. The crust relates to all of the important elements of skill, knowledge, experience, and competency. In our development efforts in organizations, where do we spend most of our time? Crust. It's not even close. We spend at least 95% of our time on the crust. So I want you to reflect on that. Ethics today has turned into a back-end compliance process. That's what it's turned into. And we have far too many employees that are onboarding in organizations and they have no self-directed ethical creed. And we take them. That introduces amazing variability into the system. And so a question that you might want to ask yourself is, what are you doing on the core? The values of your organization are the precious, freestanding assets that you possess as an organization. Everything else is expendable. Every strategy in every company, in every industry around the globe is in decay. Isn't that true? The only question is, what's the rate of the melt? It's the only question. So 3 types of leaders based on that very simple distinction. Strong core, strong crust equals a great leader. It's pretty obvious. A strong core and a weak crust equals a nice leader. They're nice. They're nice to have around. And the third category, a weak core and a strong crust, is a dangerous leader. Pretty interesting. Okay? Warren Buffett said, in looking for people to hire, you look for 3 qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if you don't have the first, the other 2 will kill you. It's a good statement, though, isn't it? It's a great statement. Here's my last concluding comment. We've done a lot of exit interviews. What's an exit interview? You sit down with someone when they're going to leave the organization, right? They may be retiring, they may be getting promoted somewhere, transferred, leaving the organization. And in many of the exit interviews that we've done, we've asked people a question. What do you value the most about the professional experience that you've had? Today's your last day. What do you value the most? There are 2 responses that trump everything else. They're consistently cited by people, regardless of demographic. You know what they are? Who can tell me? 2 responses. What do you value the most? The reason that I want to share this with you is that you probably would like to know you'll think the same thing on your last day. Who can tell me what they might be? Number 1, relationships. Okay? Number 2, close. Number 2, personal contribution. These are the 2 things. And when you come back to people 5 years later, 10 years later, and you ask them the same question again, what did you value the most about that experience you had? Same answers. Relationships, personal contribution. Thought you might like to know that. It's an empirical truth. And it's a gift to understand that. So let me recap. 2 things that you want to be aware of and seeking for as you're building bench and as you're trying to find leaders. Look for people who have a desire to create value, regardless of what you're doing today. Number 2, look for people who have a very deep-seated desire to be accountable all the way to outcome level. Hope that's valuable to you. Thanks for having me today. Other questions? Yes, sir.
What you were saying reminded me a lot of level 5
Yeah, Jim Collins.
Those two construct conceptual models.
How do we relate that? Okay. The fundamental premise of Level 5 Leadership by Collins is that Level 5 leadership includes a paradoxical blend of determination, will, and humility coming together. I buy that, okay? Let me give you a concept that I use in my executive coaching. In executive coaching, I use a concept that is called the final stage of confidence. Very few leaders arrive at that level of development. The final stage of confidence means that you have developed to a point where you lose all preoccupation with yourself. You are done telling the world how smart you are. And so you stop engaging in smart person behavior. And you learn how to shut up. And so very often with executives, last year I coached 34 executives. Several of them had this problem. So I say, get out a piece of paper, draw a line through the middle. On the left, I want you to write the word advocacy. On the right side of the paper, I want you to write the word discovery. Now I want you to cross out advocacy. And I want you to take that piece of paper to all your meetings as a prompt and a check and a cue to help you understand that your role is to contribute through other people. And so behaviorally and psychologically, if you haven't made that transition, that becomes a limiting factor in your current role, pardon me, a derailer in your current role, and a limiting factor for upward mobility. So back to your question about level 5. The final stage of confidence, you can only achieve it through a high degree of self-awareness. It's not possible otherwise. That corresponds with humility, which in many ways is the willingness to have a truthful encounter with reality about yourself. Does that help? Okay, another question? Yep.
How do you hold yourself more accountable?
How do you hold yourself more accountable? It's a great question. I have a coach, my wife, and she holds me accountable. And that's been very, very helpful. I think to hold yourself accountable, you have to document things normally. If you don't document things, they fade from memory. Isn't that true? So I would recommend that you do that as far as holding yourself accountable to what. And then number 2 is have a triage session every morning to prioritize, right? Prioritization is based on 2 criteria, importance and urgency. And I don't care what kind of smartphone app you use. It's not about the app. It's about being able to prioritize until it hurts and then executing that. So there's a couple of suggestions. Yes, ma'am.
What have you seen, Dr. Clark, since the downturn as far as management changes?
Okay.
Changes, business changes.
Sure.
And exposure of talent versus non-talent.
Okay, I'll tell you the biggest change that I've seen. We've been through, in some cases, 7 years of a recessionary environment. The natural consequence of that, what does it do to an organization? It shifts the focus to manage the cost side of the business, right? So the set of instincts that we have shift, so we become more directive and more rule-based because we are managing cost and it's an environment of austerity. And so often we reel folks in from outcome level to project back to task. We lose the agility. So now as we move into an up market and we begin this next business cycle, which by the way will probably be quite different than the last one, the organization is on its heels and not on its toes, and it doesn't have the agility, because 5 years, the Great Recession was long enough that it not only had an impact, it re-socialized organizations because it was long. If you have a recession that's a year, maybe 2, it won't have that impact. 7 years, that's a long enough time to fundamentally recast the cultural norms of an organization. And so you have to take a real hard look at the norms of the organization, the leadership, the instincts, and then how do you get back to a growth mentality, because you haven't been managing in that environment for a long time. So you've got to shift the organization so that you can exploit opportunities. We're in the business, leaders are in the business of responding to adaptive challenges. There are 3 categories. The opportunity, here's the definition, potential benefit. Category number 2, the threat, potential harm, and crisis, certain harm. That's what we do for a living, is we respond to those 3 categories of adaptive challenge. But you can see, have you seen the shift in your own organizations? This has been a long, hard slog. And people are worn out in many ways, and they're discouraged. Not everybody, but in some organizations, in many they are. And it's been tough. It's been tough. Any other questions? Yep.
So, thanks for the seminar. We've recently acquired 9 different startups.
9?
9. And
Okay.
18 months. And with them, of course, came at least 9. They all have their founders.
Yeah.
With them came at least 9 leaders.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure that the leaders stay leaders? Because we acquired them into a large organization
Okay.
that is very management-based.
Okay. It begins with your strategy. The nature of merger integration is defined by your strategy, right? So are you going to let them run as highly autonomous business units or not? So we begin with what is the strategic vision, or are you going to integrate them in closely in terms of structure, process? Then comes the cultural question. What do you believe in? Do you believe in a Berkshire Hathaway model where Warren says, you know what? You run it as a very autonomous unit. I will manage you solely at outcome level delegation. That's what Buffett does. It just depends on the strategy, which would then prescribe the nature of your merger integration. But here's the risk. If you really want to fold them in to one company with, one integrated monolithic company, oftentimes founders start to lose their motivation. So you have to be careful about that downside risk. And hopefully you thought about that from the very beginning, because they get restless. Yeah, okay. Another question? Yes, sir.
What role does mentorship play in the leadership development process?
Mentorship? We often, first of all, distinguish between coaching and mentoring. Mentoring is usually defined as a less frequent, informal mode of helping people. Does that square with your understanding? Okay. But generally speaking, let me say it this way. There are several fundamental shifts that have to occur as we move to higher levels of responsibility. One of those shifts is a greater emphasis and focus on the development of talent. So that has to become an obsession along with the performance of the organization. If a leader, as he or she develops and moves to higher levels of responsibility, if that obsession with talent development does not accompany performance, at some point that becomes a huge liability. And by the way, so this gets to the point of culture. The culture is what you want it to be. And I would hope that you would cultivate and foster a coaching-rich, mentoring-rich culture. Does that make sense? Because what we're finding across industry is that we can accelerate time to competency much faster than we thought possible. But what is how does 90% of the learning occur in organizations? On the job. It's informal. So the mentoring and the coaching accelerates that natural process where it is incorporated into work stream. So that's a huge emphasis. It's a huge emphasis in my mind. How much time do we have, Rich?
Take one last question.
One last question. Yes, ma'am.
Which environment do you find that leaders excel in? What brings out their skills?
That's a tough question. Yeah. What kind of environment? I would go back to, here's what I would go back to. I'd go back to delegation and accountability. The misconception that a lot of leaders have is that they say, you know what, I don't want to let go. But what they don't understand is that there's a front end. The front end is delegation, the back end is accountability. You never let go of accountability. The only question is, at what level do you delegate? But you never let go of the accountability. So one answer to your question would be an environment that allows people to accelerate to outcome level delegation as soon as they possibly can. Does that make sense? High performance in organizations and at an individual level is based on the concept of transfer of ownership. Okay? So let me give you an example, and then we'll be done. If Peyton Manning goes to the sideline on a timeout, now I want you to think about the traditional notion of coaching. The traditional notion of coaching, which is bred deeply into the American culture, is that we do this. We don't stop talking. But if Peyton Manning goes to the sideline to confer with the coaches, do you see that happening? No, you do not. The first words out of the coach's mouth are, what do you see out there? Okay? What do you see out there? And so I would advocate a culture that is a question-based discovery culture. The old notion of coaching is dying. We've got to transfer ownership earlier and more completely to accelerate development and performance. Does that make any sense? Okay. Thank you.